Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. For 32 years, May was observed in the U.S. as Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, or APA Heritage Month for short. Then last year, the Biden-Harris administration officially changed that designation from APA to AANHPI, Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander. It's a mouthful for good reason. AANHPI covers at least 20.6 million people who check corresponding boxes on surveys. So the addition of Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander is, perhaps, a step in the right direction. Yet it does little to show how vastly diverse and distinct those letter groups are within themselves. And when it comes to the recently added Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander categories, understanding who they are and what their lives are like can be difficult, especially because their numbers in Greater Metro St. Louis are very small. A look at the 2022 Census Bureau numbers puts the figure at less than 1% for every county that's part of our region. But small doesn't mean insignificant. In fact, maintaining and building strong cultural ties and a sense of identity can be even more vital when you're an only, not just for personal reasons, but extended community reasons too. That's something Edwardsville resident, writer, and parent Stephanie Malia Krauss knows firsthand. In fact, she's written a forthcoming piece for Insider that explores those reasons, and she's here today to talk with us about it. Stephanie, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Elaine, thanks for having me. So glad to be here today.
Now, early on in your Insider piece, which is a personal reflection, you talk about you and your children being onlys where you live and how easy it would be to blend in there. So tell us a bit about that.
Absolutely. So I have two school-age boys who are just wrapping up the school year, 4th grade and 6th grade. And we are fair-skinned Hawaiians, or as we like to call ourselves, Jewaians. My mom is Hawaiian and my dad is Jewish, and that's where we got our skin profile. And so we present as most people in the community where they are going to school. So they are in the Triad School District next to Edwardsville, which is predominantly white. And so what my husband and I recognized early on was that any introduction to our culture and our heritage and language, it was going to have to happen at home. We were really fortunate because about 7 years ago, my mom was able to move from New Jersey, where she was living, here. And so together, she and I have committed to integrating culture and language and food and story into our home. But for the most part, that's where it stays because we don't see it reflected anywhere in the town where they go to school and where it is reflected in the broader community, particularly new food establishments. The representation is not always authentic. Yeah. The pronunciation of words often incorrect. And it gets close to our culture, but the misses are pretty pronounced.
Yeah. Now, you've lived in places other than St. Louis. Is some of what you've just talked about, is that something that you experienced elsewhere, or does it feel different to be Native Hawaiian in this particular region?
I haven't reflected on that a lot, but as I think about it, I actually do think that there is a difference here that can really be attributed to the history of this community, both as a deeply segregated, predominantly Black and white community. The area we live in Southern Illinois, many of the families were born and raised and stayed in the community, multiple generations who have never interacted with somebody who is Native Hawaiian. There are very few Asian children in the community. And so in the other places where I have lived, New Jersey, Florida, Arizona, Houston, Texas, there was much more diversity. And in Arizona in particular, Hawaiians are funny people. They tend to move to places like Arizona and Las Vegas and Washington, very far from the geography of the islands.
Yeah.
There were other Hawaiian people there. And in Florida, you had so much Latinx and Latino influence and also kind of coastal culture. It was Southern Florida. That also felt a little bit closer.
Yeah. So the peculiarities, we might call them, of being here in the greater metro St. Louis area, did that have anything to do with what compelled you to write the piece that will be coming out in Insider?
It did. So this is corresponding with a new book that I have coming out, Whole Child, Whole Life, explores culture and identity. And one of the pieces that I was really wrestling with as a mom of these two Hawaiian kids here in the community was that as a researcher who focuses on child well-being and youth mental health, I knew from the research that connection to culture was vital for thriving and very protective against youth mental health challenges and also emotional challenges. And my kids, outside of what we introduce in the home, could go through their entire lives without any exposure or integration to their culture. So a year ago, we took our family to Hawaii for the first time after the pandemic. And the piece that really inspired the Insider essay was that the age that my boys are, fourth grade, so 10 and 12, those tween years are when kids begin to ask big questions like, who am I? Why do I look the way I look? Who are my people? Where do I belong? And when we got to Hawaii, Elaine, and they saw for the first time everything from the regular grocery store carrying all of the groceries that we have to go to specialty stores to get or go on Amazon to get, to their language being not only celebrated, but completely normal, it activated a level of aliveness and authenticity that I don't think we even realized they were missing.
Now, before we get much further, I think it would be helpful to get some clarification about something. And this kind of goes back to what you were describing about eateries that are opening up and the foods that are served there, the way that they pronounce things. Now, there's a difference between Hawaii Native and Native Hawaiian. And it might seem like that's an obvious difference, but it's more than mere syntax. So what is the difference between being a native of Hawaii and being Native Hawaiian, and why is that distinction important?
So in the Hawaiian language, there is the word kanaka, which means kind of local person, or kama'aina, person of the land is how it translates. And then there's another Hawaiian word, kanaka ma'oli, which is Native Hawaiian. And the way to think about this is the same way that people are, when we think about American Indian or Native Americans, Cherokee or Lakota, this is an indigenous group to the islands. So we are registered Native Hawaiians. And when you go back in Hawaii's history, it's a pretty sordid history where there was an illegal annexation of a country that had a monarchy and was very well run and respected, but it was also in a position geographically that made it incredibly valuable for military and for markets. The Hawaiian people since the 70s have been experiencing an incredible cultural renaissance, really working hard to reclaim what was always theirs to begin with. Being somebody born and raised in the state of Hawaii is not the same thing as being native to the land like you would be for any other indigenous group.
Right. Now, I'd like to get another perspective on this, and it's an intergenerational one. I'd like to bring in Laurie Kilstein, who happens to be Stephanie's mother and a resident of Edwardsville. Welcome to the program, Laurie.
Thank you for having me, Elaine.
No, you were kind of nodding as your daughter was speaking. And when it comes to being Native Hawaiian and being here in the metro St. Louis area, what has it been like to have or to carry that identity and live here in a place where you are really among the onlys?
It's actually, it makes me feel unique in one sense, but it also makes me feel alone. And I truly miss being home in Hawaii. Hawaii will always be my home. I accidentally ended up moving to the mainland. I was not planning that. And as I've made my way through different states and raised my children in Princeton, New Jersey, and then moved here to St. Louis to be with my daughter and son-in-law and grandchildren, I still find it difficult. Mm-hmm. And I think the best way I can describe it, and I shared this with my daughter and my two grandsons on our last trip to Hawaii. There's a part of me that I suppress here on the mainland. Mm-hmm. And the minute I get off the plane, I'm home. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter what island, whether it's my island or one of my other islands, I get off and I quietly say to myself, hello, Laurie.
Yeah.
And I'm home again. Mm-hmm. And there's a part of me that bubbles up and I feel like my true self. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I really try and have tried to give out aloha and at least be able to spread that wherever I go with the students I teach, the people I meet. That's something that is never lost in me. Mm-hmm. I wish there were more people like that. Sure. But I think that aloha is contagious. Mm-hmm. And I think people gravitate towards me because of that. Mm-hmm.
And what is aloha?
It's a way of living where you really care about people. And it's when you go to the islands, people are just kinder. Mm-hmm. Aloha is showing love and kindness and talking and caring about people. It was just something that we learned and was ingrained in us growing up in Hawaii.
So do you think that after that trip to Hawaii with your grandsons, Hi'ilani and Koali'i, that you feel a little bit more at home now that they have experienced that?
Definitely. And that's why when raising my daughter and her 4 brothers, I made a point. We went back to Hawaii 1, 2, 3 times a year. My entire family was still there. And it was the most important thing to me to take them, teach them about Hawaiian culture, and show them Hawaii and give them that sense of aloha and meet their great-grandparents. It cost us a lot of money, but it was really worth it.
That's quite amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, and I am myself like foreign-born, not born in Korea, of Korean descent, and I did not get to visit Korea until I was 19, and it was a transformative trip, but it wasn't until I got to live there a little bit longer when I was older that it really changed the way that I saw and felt things.
Oh, I'm sure.
It resonates with me what you were talking about. We need to take a quick break, but we'll be back to continue this conversation. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. We're talking with Edwardsville residents and Native Hawaiians, Stephanie Malia Krauss and her mother, Laurie Nalani Kilstein, about what it's like to live and raise children on the mainland, and specifically in the St. Louis region. Stephanie, in the insider piece you wrote, you described a moment involving your younger son that crystallized a very critical truth for you. Tell us about that.
It changed everything for me. And for a long time, when we were growing up, we struggled financially, and it was hard to make sense of why and how we were able to make all of these trips to Hawaii. And it wasn't until as a mother experiencing my own children in Hawaii that I was kind of ruined financially. I can't imagine now not taking every extra dollar and funneling it to support as many trips as possible for as long as possible in Hawaii. Mm-hmm. My son in our home, my younger son, only goes by Koa, so a part of his name, Ko'oli'i. And it's very common in Hawaiian families to have an English first name and then Hawaiian middle names. And then in Hawaii or with your Hawaiian family, you go by your Hawaiian name. So Koa is Harrison at school, mm-hmm. at camp, and in community. Mm-hmm. But he identifies as Koa if you ask him.
Yeah.
So we went to Hawaii, and we're on the island where my mom was raised, Oahu, where I spent most summers when I was his age, living with my grandparents and with my mom. And I was speaking at an event with teachers and educators, and he was given a name tag to fill out. And he ran up to me, and in big letters, he had written K-O-A, Koa. And he turned it to me, big smile, ear to ear, and he said, "Look, Mom, I'm me." And it was as though my whole world shifted because two things happened at once. The first was that I studied child well-being and youth mental health, and I knew about the importance of culture. But I had forgotten myself in the busyness of our day-to-day that my kid wasn't always his full self in school and in public and grappling with what it meant that he could be fully liberated to be him. The other part was it was the first moment in my life with the integration of all of my identities, where I was with my mom as a daughter, with my husband as a wife, with my kids as a mom, professionally connected as a Hawaiian woman, able to use the language that was most intimate and natural for me, able to use references, able to use my own kids' Hawaiian names in public. And so it was a moment in time where it tapped into a level of thriving that was so far beyond what I even recognized we needed. And I remember processing it with my mom afterwards and saying, I don't know where we go from here, because how can you suppress that again once you've let it out? And it's not even, there is lack of representation here. But when it comes to Hawaiian culture, there's also a reduction and a dismissal of that. So we were talking about the aloha as a word is a way of life. It's one of the most sacred pieces of our culture. And it does end up on napkins or teenagers at Edwardsville High School working at fast food places, saying it in the fast food line. Mm-hmm.
So it's cheapened.
It's cheapened. That's a great word for it.
Who is that story for?
All of us. I mean, I think there is this piece of recognizing that a part of our children developing is recognizing who they are and where they come from and the generational cultural context in which they are situated. And that community is so much richer and learning and development so much more vibrant when it's tied to historic roots, when it's tied to cultural roots. And here we are in a moment where in our region, on the Missouri and the Illinois side, books that reflect culture, content that reflects culture is dismissed, rejected, questioned, threatened, cheapened. And so for me, with my understanding of the science of learning and development, I see that not only does that compromise the well-being and mental health of kids, it also slows and maybe even stops in spaces their learning and development.
Laurie, as Stephanie's mother, and then you'd mentioned Stephanie and her 5 brothers? Four. I didn't mean to add another one.
That's okay.
But you clearly prioritized Hawaiian, Native Hawaiian culture, language, food, all of that. Now, how does it feel to hear Stephanie now talk about her own children and what has come about because of what you've poured in?
It's so important to me, so important. It's being passed on, it's not stopping. If Stephanie had moved here and decided, you know what, I just don't have the time to go to Hawaii, I don't have the money, we'll just read Hawaiian books to the kids, that would have made me sad.
Yeah.
It would have been cutting off all the work that I did, and it would have stopped this wonderful cultural awareness and growth that now my grandchildren are experiencing.
Right.
So it continues on.
And is that part of the reason you decided to leave New Jersey, which I think was your longtime home, and come here to the St. Louis area?
To be with my daughter and son-in-law. Of all my children, were the only ones with little ones. And I did. I wanted to be a part of their life. And I did want to teach them Pidgin English and turn them on to really local Hawaiian food, which I have.
And what's been the most rewarding part of that decision?
Being able to just pass it on and see that it's going to continue. They hopefully will continue it, and it will always be a part of our family. One of Stephanie's brothers just got a Hawaiian family arm tattoo, and he said every morning he looks at it and loves it.
Yeah.
So everything we've done is as much as we can do to really embrace our culture.
Yeah. So, Stephanie, we're catching you just as your newest book is launching. Congratulations on that. It's fodder for a whole other conversation. But, the trip that you took to visit your native Hawaii for the first time with them, it seems like it changed a lot for you and your children and for your whole family, including your husband, really. In what ways do you think the combination of the new book and the trip, has it affected or will affect the way that you all, including you, Mom, move about as onlys in Edwardsville and in the St. Louis region?
In some ways, I think it's changed everything because it has intensified what we already knew instinctively to be true, which is that culture, Hawaiian culture, so Hawaii, the word breaks up to actually translate partially as breath and partially to say, you are the land and the land is you. So there is a connection not just to culture, but to place, the actual landing, being on the land. And that means I have to get my boys to the land. And I think I recognize now we've been able to I'm pretty hooked after this first trip. Thanks to work, we've been able to go back 3 more times as a family.
Wow.
And I've brought my mom and my boys each time because I want as many trips as possible for all of the generations together. To recognize that culture is both powerful and fragile, and that without the passing down and learning, because my boys aren't learning it in school, because they're not learning it in context, in community, the only way they get it is through us and through those trips, and then eventually through their own reading and exploration. And so I think that it is about, how do I cultivate in them a deep and abiding curiosity to always explore and deepen who they are, to be really open and humble about the things that we don't know, and that doesn't make them less Hawaiian for not knowing, and that they get the space to then say, I didn't grow up in Hawaii.
Yeah.
I want to learn. When we have gone back since that first trip, I take them to places that feel most sacred and most common. So Aloha Taro Farm, to get their feet and hands in the dirt and mud and the ground, and the grocery store, which for us is pretty sacred to have. And anyone listening who has had this experience of being in any kind of minority group connected to food, to have your children go to the normal grocery store and see their food and see their food at, the front of the aisles, is a life-changing moment that can't be dismissed.
Stephanie Malia Krauss is an educator, social worker, researcher, and writer, a Native Hawaiian mom with 2 children growing up in a very Native Hawaiian and St. Louisan home in Edwardsville. Her forthcoming article for Insider describes the transformative effects of taking her kids to visit Hawaii for the first time. She's also just published her newest book, Whole Child, Whole Life, 10 Ways to Help Kids Live, Learn, and Thrive. And Laurie Nalani Kilstein is a longtime educator. Thank you both for joining us today. I'm so glad you were able to come in.
Thanks for holding space for the conversation.
This episode was produced by Elaine Cha and recorded and edited by Maya Norfleet.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Our podcast proudly supports St. Louis artists by using music from Life Creative Group.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.